The sun bore down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Dry Creek, a frontier town carved out of the harsh landscape of the American West in the summer of 1887. Heat shimmered off the packed earth, distorting the weathered storefronts and saloons that lined Main Street. This was a land of unforgiving laws, and even more unforgiving men, where justice often came at the end of a rope and a man's word could mean the difference between life and death. Luke Carson rode into town on a bay mare that had seen better days, her coat dulled by trail dust and weeks of hard riding. He was a drifter, a cowboy who sold his skills to whoever needed an extra hand with cattle or horses. His weathered face spoke of countless days under the scorching sun, and his calloused hands told stories of honest work. At 28, he'd been riding from ranch to ranch for nearly a decade, never staying long enough to put down roots, always moving when the work dried up or when staying meant trouble. The town of Dry Creek wasn't much different from a dozen others he'd passed through. A collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with ranches spreading out into the surrounding plains like spokes on a wagon wheel. But work was work, and he'd heard the Blackwell Ranch was hiring. Thomas Blackwell was one of the wealthiest men in the county, owning more cattle and land than most folks could dream of. His ranch sprawled across thousands of acres of prime grazing land, and his influence reached deep into the town's politics and law. When Luke presented himself at the ranch house, hat in hand, it wasn't Blackwell who greeted him, but the foreman, a grizzled man named Hank Morrison. "You know horses?" Morrison asked, eyeing Luke with a suspicion reserved for all strangers. "Been working them since I was knee-high," Luke replied simply. "Can you break 'em?" "If they can be broken." Morrison nodded slowly. "Pays $1 a day plus grub and a bunk, mister. Blackwell's away on business most times, so you'll be taking orders from me, or Mrs. Blackwell. No drinking, no fighting, no bothering the women folk. Break any of those rules, and you'll be run off faster than a jackrabbit with its tail on fire." Luke agreed to the terms, and Morrison led him to the bunkhouse where a dozen other hands made their home. The men were typical of their kind, rough, weather-beaten souls who'd found their place in the brutal simplicity of ranch life. It was on his third day that Luke first encountered Clarissa Blackwell. She emerged from the main house like a vision in blue silk, her blonde hair pinned up in the latest fashion from back east. She couldn't have been more than 25, a good 20 years younger than her husband, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone who'd grown accustomed to getting what she wanted. "You must be the new hand," she said, her voice honey-sweet, but with an edge that made Luke wary. "Morrison speaks well of your work with the horses." Luke touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Her eyes, green as prairie grass in spring, lingered on him a moment too long. "Well, keep it up. My husband values good workers." As the weeks passed, Luke threw himself into his work. The Blackwell Ranch had some of the finest horseflesh in the territory, and he found satisfaction in gentling the wild mustangs brought in from the plains. He kept to himself mostly, sharing few words with the other hands beyond what was necessary for the work. He'd learned long ago that staying quiet kept a man out of trouble, but Clarissa Blackwell seemed determined to notice him. She'd appear at the corrals when he was working, ostensibly to check on the horse's progress. She'd request his help with tasks that any of the house servants could have handled, adjusting a saddle, moving hay bales from one barn to another. Each time, her perfume would fill his nostrils, a scent too fine and delicate for the rough world of the ranch. "You're different from the others," she told him one afternoon as he repaired a fence near the main house. Her husband had been gone for 2 weeks on a cattle-buying expedition to Kansas City. "Don't reckon I am, ma'am. Just here to work." She laughed, a sound like crystal chimes. "Oh, but you are. You have a gentleness with the horses, strength, but controlled. It's intriguing." Luke felt the danger in her words like a rattlesnake's warning. He'd seen this before, bored ranch wives with too much time and too little attention from their husbands. It never ended well, especially not for the hired hand. "Best I get back to work, Mrs. Blackwell," he said, not meeting her eyes. The tension built over the following days. Clarissa's attempts at conversation became bolder. Her touches, a hand on his arm, fingers brushing his as she handed him something, more frequent. The other hands noticed, shooting Luke warning glances. Even Morrison pulled him aside one evening. "Watch yourself around her," the foreman said quietly. "Mister, Blackwell's a powerful man, and he's got a temper like a grizzly with a sore tooth. Whatever game she's playing, you don't want any part of it." Luke nodded, understanding the warning, but avoiding Clarissa entirely proved impossible. She seemed to know his schedule, appearing wherever he was working with requests that couldn't be refused without seeming disrespectful. The breaking point came on a sweltering afternoon in late August. Thomas Blackwell had left that morning for another business trip, this time to negotiate water rights with neighboring ranchers. Luke was in the main barn, checking on a mare that had been favoring her left foreleg, when Clarissa entered. "Luke," she said, and the use of his first name sent a chill down his spine despite the heat. "I need your help with something." "What can I do for you, Mrs. Blackwell?" he asked, not looking up from the horse's leg. "There's a saddle in the back stall that needs adjusting. It's my personal riding saddle." Luke straightened slowly. The back stall was isolated, far from where any of the other hands would be working. Perhaps one of the house servants. "I asked you," she interrupted, her voice taking on a steely edge. "Or are you refusing a direct request?" Trapped, Luke followed her to the back of the barn. The stall was dim, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that filtered through the gaps in the walls. Clarissa's saddle sat on a rack, looking perfectly fine to Luke's experienced eye. "I don't see anything wrong with it, ma'am," he said carefully. She moved closer, too close. "Must you be so formal? Call me Clarissa." "That wouldn't be proper, ma'am." "Proper?" she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing about this place is proper. Do you know what it's like, being married to a man who sees you as just another possession, like his cattle or his horses? That's not my concern. Ma'am, I should go." But she stepped between him and the stall door. "Stay, please. I'm so lonely. Luke, you must understand loneliness, drifting from place to place. Mrs. Blackwell." She pressed herself against him, her hands reaching for his face. Luke grasped her wrists gently but firmly, holding her away. "No, ma'am, this isn't right. You're a married woman, and I'm just hired help. Nothing good can come of this." Her face transformed, the plaintive expression replaced by fury. "You're refusing me. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, ma'am, and that's why I'm leaving." Luke released her wrists and stepped around her, heading for the door. "How dare you!" she shrieked. "You think you can lay hands on me and just walk away?" Luke froze, understanding flooding through him like ice water. "I never— Help!" Clarissa screamed, her voice piercing the afternoon air. "Someone help me!" She grabbed at her dress, tearing the collar, messing her carefully pinned hair. Luke stood paralyzed, watching the trap close around him as footsteps pounded toward the barn. "He attacked me," Clarissa cried as ranch hands burst into the stall, Morrison at their head. "This animal tried to force himself on me." Luke raised his hand slowly, meeting Morrison's eyes. The foreman's face was grim, disappointed. "I didn't touch her," Luke said quietly. "She's lying, but it didn't matter. The script was written, the parts assigned. He was a drifter, a nobody. She was Thomas Blackwell's wife." As rough hands seized his arms and someone's fist connected with his stomach, Luke knew his fate was sealed. In the unforgiving lands of the West, a poor man's truth was worth less than a rich woman's lie. The sun was still blazing as they dragged him toward town and the jail that would be his home while he awaited a justice that would be anything but just. Behind them, Clarissa Blackwell watched from the barn door, her torn dress and disheveled appearance telling a story that everyone would believe because it was easier than questioning the word of their betters. Luke Carson had ridden into Dry Creek looking for work. Now, he would be lucky if he rode out at all. The Dry Creek jail was a squat building of rough-hewn stone, built to withstand both the elements and the desperate men it housed. Luke Carson sat on the narrow wooden bench that served as a bed, his ribs aching from the beating the ranch hands had given him before depositing him here. The cell was small, perhaps 8 feet by 6, with a barred window too high to reach and too small to squeeze through even if he could. Sheriff William Callahan stood outside the bars, studying Luke with the measured gaze of a man who'd spent 20 years sorting truth from lies. He was in his early 50s, gray-haired and weathered, with the bearing of someone who'd seen enough of human nature to be surprised by little but disappointed by much. The charge is attempted assault on a married woman, Callahan said, his voice neutral. Mrs. Blackwell says you cornered her in the barn, tried to force yourself on her, tore her dress when she fought back. Luke met the sheriff's eyes steadily. She's lying. That's what they all say. Maybe, but I'm saying it true. Luke shifted on the hard bench, wincing. She came to me, Sheriff, been after me for weeks. When I turned her down, she started screaming. Callahan's expression didn't change. You got any witnesses to back that up? You know I don't. She made sure we were alone. Then it's your word against hers. And she's Thomas Blackwell's wife. The sheriff didn't need to explain what that meant. They both understood the arithmetic of frontier justice. News traveled fast in a town like Dry Creek. By evening, Luke could hear the crowd gathering outside, their voices carrying through the small window. Some called for a hanging, others for tar and feathers. All of them had already decided his guilt. In their minds, he was no longer Luke Carson, cowboy and horse trainer. He was a predator, a beast who dared to touch what he had no right to even look at. The sheriff dispersed the crowd with firm words and the promise that justice would be done proper, through the courts. But Luke knew that frontier justice had a way of finding its own path, especially when powerful men felt their honor had been stained. It was near midnight when he heard footsteps in the jail's front room. Not the sheriff's heavy tread, but something lighter, more hesitant. The door between the office and the cells opened, and a young woman stepped through, carrying a lamp that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Luke had seen her around town. Emma Callahan, the sheriff's daughter. She was maybe 22 or 23, with auburn hair usually pinned up proper and modest clothing that couldn't quite hide her natural grace. But what struck him now were her eyes. Intelligent, searching, not holding the condemnation he'd seen in everyone else's. Miss Callahan, he said, standing slowly. Don't reckon your father knows you're here. He's making rounds, she replied, moving closer to the bars. I wanted to see you for myself. Come to gawk at the animal? The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. She studied him for a long moment. You don't look like an animal to me. Mr. Carson, you look like a man who's been falsely accused. Luke felt something shift in his chest. Hope. Perhaps, though he tried to squash it. Hope was dangerous for a man in his position. What makes you say that? I was at the general store this afternoon. Mrs. Blackwell was there earlier, before the incident. She was talking to her maid, Sarah. I only caught fragments, but she mentioned something about teaching someone their place and knowing how to handle men who don't appreciate what's offered. Luke gripped the bars. Would Sarah testify to that? Emma's face fell slightly. Sarah's worked for the Blackwells for 10 years. Her whole family depends on that income. She'd never speak against them. Then it doesn't matter what she said. Perhaps not in court, but it matters to me. Emma set the lamp on a small table and pulled up a wooden stool. Tell me what really happened. Luke found himself talking, the words coming easier than he'd expected. He told her about Clarissa's advances, the increasing pressure, his attempts to avoid her without giving offense. He described the scene in the barn, Clarissa's transformation from spurned woman to victim. I've been drifting for years, Miss Callahan, seen plenty of trouble, some of it my own making, but I've never forced myself on a woman. Never would. My mama raised me better than that. Emma listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. I believe you, she said simply. Those 3 words hit Luke harder than any of the punches he'd taken. Why? Because I've watched Clarissa Blackwell for 3 years, since she married Thomas and came to Dry Creek. I've seen how she looks at the younger ranch hands, how she treats anyone she considers beneath her. And because, she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully, because when you talk about what happened, you look angry, hurt, frustrated, but not guilty. A guilty man's eyes are different. Your father teach you that? Among other things. She stood, gathering her lamp. I need to go before he returns. But Mr. Carson, Luke, I'm going to help you. Don't, Luke said quickly. Don't risk yourself for me, your father's position, your reputation. My reputation won't be worth much if I stand by and watch an innocent man hang. Her voice was firm, reminding Luke of steel wrapped in silk. There has to be evidence somewhere. Clarissa Blackwell isn't as clever as she thinks she is. She left then, taking the light with her and leaving Luke in darkness. But for the first time since the barn door had burst open and his fate had been sealed, he didn't feel entirely alone. The next days passed in a blur of hostile faces and legal proceedings. Thomas Blackwell returned from his business trip in a fury that shook the town. He stormed into the jail, had to be physically restrained by Sheriff Callahan from getting to Luke's cell. You dare touch my wife, you filthy saddle tramp! Blackwell roared, his face purple with rage. I'll see you swing for this. The preliminary hearing was a farce. Clarissa Blackwell, dressed in mourning black as if her virtue had died, gave a tearful account of Luke's alleged attack. She'd been checking on her favorite mare. She said when he'd cornered her, made inappropriate suggestions. When she'd tried to leave, he'd grabbed her, torn her dress. Only her screams had saved her from worse. Luke's lawyer was a young man named Davis, appointed by the court and clearly overwhelmed by the prospect of defending such an unpopular client against the Blackwell influence. He made a few perfunctory objections but seemed resigned to the inevitable outcome. Throughout it all, Luke noticed Emma Callahan in the courtroom, watching everything with those keen eyes. She caught his gaze once and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Whatever she was planning, she hadn't given up. The town's anger grew with each passing day. Editorials in the local newspaper called for swift justice. Merchants refused to sell to anyone who expressed doubt about Luke's guilt. The minister preached about the sanctity of marriage and the evil that lurked in the hearts of men. One evening, Sheriff Callahan brought Luke his supper, beans and cornbread, same as always. But instead of leaving immediately, he lingered. My Emma's been asking questions around town, he said conversationally. About you, about the Blackwells. Luke set down his plate carefully. I didn't ask her to. I know that. Emma's got her own mind. Always has. Her mother was the same way. The sheriff's face softened slightly at the memory. Stubborn as a Missouri mule when she thought something was right. Sheriff, Callahan held up a hand. I'm not here as her father right now. I'm here as a lawman who's spent years reading people. You don't strike me as stupid. Carson, a stupid man might try what you're accused of, but a smart man, especially a drifter who knows how the world works, he'd know better. You do. Then you believe I'm innocent? What I believe and what I can prove are 2 different things, and what I can do about it is a 3rd thing altogether. The sheriff's face was troubled. The Blackwells own half this county. They've got judges in their pockets, politicians eating from their hands. Even if I believed you were innocent as a newborn lamb, what could I do? Luke understood. Callahan was trapped between his duty to the law and the realities of power. I'm not asking you to do anything. Sheriff, just don't stop your daughter. Whatever she's doing, let her try. Callahan was quiet for a long moment. I couldn't stop Emma if I tried. Like I said, stubborn as a mule. He collected the empty plate. You know this can only end one way, don't you? Even if by some miracle you're acquitted. Thomas Blackwell won't let it stand. Men like him don't tolerate insults to their honor. I know, Luke said quietly. But I'd rather die with the truth than live with a lie. The sheriff left without another word. That night, Luke lay on his narrow bench, staring at the ceiling and thinking about a young woman with auburn hair and eyes that saw too much. He'd told her not to risk herself for him, but he was beginning to understand that Emma Callahan was not the type to be told what to do. Outside, Dry Creek settled into uneasy sleep, a town divided between those who thirsted for blood and the few who still believed in justice. And somewhere in that darkness, Emma Callahan was working to uncover the truth that might save a man's life or destroy her own standing in the only world she'd ever known. Emma Callahan moved through the streets of Dry Creek like a woman on a mission, her presence causing whispers and turned heads wherever she went. It wasn't proper for the sheriff's daughter to be investigating the Blackwell case, but propriety had never been Emma's primary concern when justice was at stake. Her first stop was the Blackwell Ranch, ostensibly to deliver a pie to the kitchen staff, a common enough gesture in their community, but her real purpose was to speak with Sarah, Clarissa's personal maid. She found the woman hanging laundry behind the servants' quarters, her weathered hands moving mechanically through the familiar task. "Miss Emma," Sarah said nervously, glancing around. "Shouldn't you be in town? I wanted to thank you all for your hard work during this difficult time," Emma said, setting down the pie basket. "It must be challenging with everything that's happened." Sarah's hand stilled on a bedsheet. "We manage, miss." Emma moved closer, lowering her voice. "Sarah, I heard you speaking with Mrs. Blackwell at the general store before the incident. Do you remember what you discussed?" The maid's face went pale. "I don't recall any particular conversation. Miss, we talk about many things." "Sarah, an innocent man's life." "I have 5 children, Miss Emma." Sarah interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My husband's been poorly these past 2 years. This job is all that stands between us and starvation. Please don't ask me to remember things that might not have happened." Emma saw the fear in the woman's eyes and knew she'd get nothing more here. But as she turned to leave, Sarah caught her sleeve. "Check the barn," she whispered quickly. "The 3rd stall from the back, where they keep the old tack. Sometimes people leave things they don't mean to." Then louder, "Thank you for the pie, Miss Emma. Good day to you." That evening, Emma waited until the ranch hands had finished their supper and retired to the bunkhouse before slipping into the barn. The building was dark, filled with the familiar scents of hay and horses. She made her way carefully to the 3rd stall from the back, her heart pounding. The stall was cluttered with old saddles, broken bridles, and dusty horse blankets. Emma searched methodically, running her hands along shelves and peering into corners. She was about to give up when her fingers brushed something smooth beneath a pile of old rope, a small leather journal. By lamplight, she saw it belonged to Jake Martinez, one of the ranch hands. The entries were sparse, mostly notes about work and weather, but one dated 3 weeks prior made her breath catch. "Mrs. B at it again. Cornered the new man Carson by the water trough today. He walked away, but she didn't look pleased. Tom says she's done this before with that fellow Williams, who left sudden last spring. Trouble coming. Mark my words." Emma tucked the journal into her coat and left quickly. Over the next days, she pieced together a pattern. She spoke carefully with merchants, other ranchers' wives, anyone who might have observed Clarissa Blackwell's behavior. The picture that emerged was troubling. A young woman married to a much older, often absent husband, seeking attention and affirmation in inappropriate ways. She found Tom Bradley, the hand mentioned in the journal, drinking at the Dusty Spur Saloon. It took 3 whiskeys and her father's name to get him talking. "Williams was a good worker," Tom said, his words slightly slurred. "Quiet fellow, minded his own business, but Mrs. Blackwell took a shine to him. When he didn't reciprocate, things got ugly. Mr. Blackwell came home unexpected one day. Found her crying, dress must. She said Williams had made advances. He was run out of town that very night. Lucky he wasn't shot." "Why didn't anyone speak up?" Emma asked. Tom laughed bitterly. "Speak against the Blackwells? Might as well sign your own death warrant. Miss, we all got families to feed." Emma's visits to the jail became regular, always when her father was conveniently elsewhere. She brought Luke books, decent food, and updates on her investigation. Their conversations grew longer, deeper. "You shouldn't be doing this," Luke told her one evening as rain drummed on the jail's tin roof. "Your reputation is my own concern." Emma finished. "Tell me about yourself. Luke, how does a man end up drifting from ranch to ranch?" Luke was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his parents to cholera when he was 16. He joined a cattle drive to Texas, learned the cowboy trade, never stopped moving. "There's a freedom in it," he said. "No ties, no complications, or at least there was. Do you ever think about settling down?" Emma asked, then blushed at her own boldness. "Didn't used to," Luke admitted, his eyes meeting hers through the bars. Man starts thinking different when he meets someone worth staying for. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility and impossibility in equal measure. Emma reached through the bars, her hand finding his. His fingers were calloused but gentle as they enclosed hers. "We'll get you out of here," she whispered. "I promise." The next night, the rain turned into a torrential downpour. The jail's roof, never properly maintained, began to leak steadily into Luke's cell. By midnight, he was shivering, soaked through, with nowhere dry to lie down. Emma arrived with blankets and her father's spare clothes, finding Luke burning with fever. Sheriff Callahan was dealing with a disturbance at the saloon, a convenient absence that Emma suspected wasn't entirely coincidental. She unlocked the cell with the spare key, helping Luke to the slightly drier front room where she'd built up the fire in the small stove. As she helped him out of his soaked shirt, her hands trembled, not from impropriety, but from the intimacy of caring for someone who'd become more than just a cause to champion. "You're risking everything," Luke murmured, his voice hoarse with fever. "Hush," Emma said, wrapping him in dry blankets. "Rest now." She stayed with him through the night, placing cool cloths on his forehead, forcing him to drink water and willow bark tea. In his delirium, he spoke of his childhood, his parents, his dreams of having his own small spread someday. Nothing fancy, just a place to call home. Near dawn, as his fever broke, Luke opened clear eyes to find Emma dozing in a chair beside him, her hand still holding his. The sight of her, hair unpinned, dress wrinkled, face soft with exhausted sleep, struck him with a tenderness so acute it was almost painful. When Sheriff Callahan returned at sunrise, he found them thus. His face was unreadable as he took in the scene. "Emma," he said quietly. She startled awake, immediately defensive. "He was dying. Papa, the fever." "I know." Callahan's voice was tired. "I've been sheriff here for 20 years. Emma, you think I don't know when my own daughter unlocks a cell?" Emma's eyes widened. "Then why?" "Because sometimes a man has to choose between the law and what's right. Doesn't mean I can do it openly." He looked at Luke, who was struggling to sit up. "You look better. Carson, thanks to your daughter. Sheriff, I owe her my life. You owe her more than that," Callahan said quietly. "She's put everything on the line for you. Her reputation, her future, my position, the whole town's talking." "I never asked," Luke began. "No, you didn't. That's what makes it mean something." The sheriff moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee. "Thomas Blackwell came by yesterday. Wanted to know why I was allowing you visitors. Suggested maybe it was time the town found a new sheriff, one who understood how things worked." Emma stood, moving to her father's side. "Papa, I'm sorry. I never meant—" "You meant to save an innocent man," Callahan interrupted. "Your mother would have done the same." He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "But Blackwell's not going to let this go. Emma, even if by some miracle Luke's acquitted, there'll be consequences. You both need to understand that." Luke struggled to his feet, still wrapped in blankets. "Sheriff, I'll leave, soon as you let me go. I'll ride out and never come back. No one needs to know about Emma's involvement." "Too late for that," Emma said firmly. "The whole town knows I've been investigating, and I'm not stopping now." She pulled out Jake's journal, showing it to her father. I have evidence. Papa, Clarissa Blackwell has done this before. Callahan read the journal entry, his face grave. It's not enough. A ranch hand's journal against the word of a wealthy woman. No jury would convict her of lying based on this. Then we need more. Emma said, there has to be something else. Some piece of evidence that proves the torn dress. Luke said suddenly. Both Callahans turned to him. She tore her own dress, but she did it after I'd already started walking away. The angle would be wrong. The tear pattern. If someone examined it closely. Emma's eyes lit up. Of course. Papa, could you? I can request it as evidence. Callahan said slowly. But Emma, you're playing with fire. The Blackwells have reached out to Judge Morrison. The trial's been moved up to next week. They want this over with quickly. Then we'd better work fast, Emma said, as the sun rose over Dry Creek, casting long shadows through the jail's windows. The three of them stood in a moment of shared understanding. They were crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, choosing truth over safety, justice over comfort. Luke watched Emma as she gathered her things, preparing to face another day of investigation and social censure. The fever had broken more than just his physical illness. It had shattered the walls he'd built around his heart. He was no longer just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for a future he'd never dared imagine. And Emma Callahan, the sheriff's brave, stubborn daughter, was fighting right beside him. The courthouse was packed to capacity on the morning of Luke Carson's trial. Every seat was taken, with more people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the scent of too many bodies in too small a space. Judge Morrison, a thin man with steel-gray whiskers and eyes like chips of flint, presided from his high bench with an air of barely concealed impatience. Emma sat in the second row, her chin high despite the whispers and cold stares directed her way. She'd worn her best dress, a deep green that brought out the fire in her hair, and carried herself with the quiet dignity her mother had taught her. Beside her, her father sat in uniform, his presence both a protection and a reminder of what was at stake. Luke was brought in shackled, looking pale but composed in the clean clothes Emma had arranged for him. His eyes found hers immediately, drawing strength from her steady gaze before he was directed to sit beside his lawyer, young Davis, who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Thomas Blackwell sat in the front row like a king holding court, his presence dominating the room. Beside him, Clarissa was the picture of wounded virtue in a modest gray dress, a lace handkerchief clutched in her delicate hands. She kept her eyes downcast, occasionally dabbing at them for effect. District Attorney Holcomb, a portly man with political ambitions and close ties to the Blackwell family, opened with a thunderous speech about the sanctity of womanhood and the need to protect decent folk from predators who would violate the social order. The evidence will show, he boomed, that the defendant, a drifter with no ties to our community, attempted to force himself upon Mrs. Blackwell, a respectable married woman, in the very barn where her husband had given him employment out of Christian charity. When Clarissa took the stand, she played her part perfectly. Her voice trembled as she described Luke's alleged advances, growing stronger as she told of fighting him off, tearing her dress in the struggle. I screamed for help, she said, allowing a single tear to track down her cheek. I thought he would kill me to keep me quiet. Davis's cross-examination was perfunctory and ineffective. He asked a few weak questions about the timeline of events, but seemed afraid to challenge her too aggressively. Emma wanted to scream at his incompetence. Then came the ranch hands, one by one, testifying to hearing Clarissa's screams, finding her disheveled and distraught. None of them met Luke's eyes as they spoke. Emma noticed how their testimonies seemed rehearsed, using almost identical phrases. It was during a brief recess that Emma made her move. She approached Davis and pressed Jake's journal into his hands, quickly explaining its significance. You have to enter this as evidence, she urged, and demand to examine the torn dress. Look at the tear pattern. Miss Callahan, Davis stammered. I can't simply introduce new evidence without, then find a way, Emma's voice was fierce. An innocent man's life is at stake. When court resumed, Davis surprised everyone by standing with newfound determination. Your Honor, the defense would like to call Miss Emma Callahan to the stand. A murmur ran through the crowd. Judge Morrison frowned. On what grounds? Miss Callahan has been conducting an independent investigation into this matter and has uncovered evidence relevant to my client's defense. Holcomb shot to his feet. Objection. Miss Callahan is not a professional investigator. Any evidence she may have gathered is admissible if it pertains directly to this case. Davis interrupted, showing more spine than he had throughout the entire trial. The defense has the right to present evidence of innocence. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked. I'll allow it, but keep it relevant. Counselor. Emma took the stand, aware of every eye in the room upon her. She saw her father's worried face, Luke's grateful one, and Clarissa Blackwell's suddenly wary expression. Under Davis's questioning, Emma presented Jake's journal, reading the entry about Clarissa's previous behavior with ranch hands. She testified about her conversation with Tom Bradley regarding the ranch hand Williams, who'd been run off under similar circumstances. This establishes a pattern of behavior, Davis said, growing more confident. Mrs. Blackwell has a history of making advances toward ranch employees and crying assault when refused. Objection! Holcomb roared. Hearsay and speculation, Your Honor, Davis continued. We would also like to examine the physical evidence, specifically Mrs. Blackwell's torn dress. Clarissa's face went pale. Thomas Blackwell half rose from his seat before catching himself. The dress was submitted as evidence. Davis pressed on. We have the right to examine it. Judge Morrison, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events, nevertheless had to agree. The dress was brought forward, and Emma was asked to examine it. The tear, she said clearly, starts from the bottom of the collar and goes down at an angle consistent with someone pulling it themselves with their right hand. If Mr. Carson had grabbed her as she claims, the tear would be from the opposite direction. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison hammered his gavel repeatedly, threatening to clear the room. Clarissa had gone white as chalk, her hands clenched in her lap. Holcomb attempted damage control on cross-examination. Miss Callahan, is it true you've been making regular visits to the defendant in jail? Yes, Emma replied steadily. Unchaperoned visits, at odd hours. I was providing medical care when Mr. Carson fell ill due to the deplorable conditions. Answer the question. Miss Callahan, were these visits unchaperoned? Emma lifted her chin. Yes, and is it true that you have developed feelings for the defendant? The question hung heavy in the air. Emma could deny it, save what was left of her reputation. But she'd come too far to lie now. My personal feelings are irrelevant to the facts of this case, she said. What matters is the truth, that Clarissa Blackwell fabricated these charges when Mr. Carson refused her advances. So, you admit to having compromised yourself with a man accused of assault, yet expect us to believe your testimony is unbiased. Before Emma could respond, a new voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. I have something to say. All heads turned to see Sarah, Clarissa's maid, standing in the doorway. She was trembling but determined, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Judge Morrison frowned. This is highly irregular. Please, Your Honor, Sarah said, walking forward. I can't stay silent anymore, not when a man might hang for something he didn't do. She held up the bundle, a white petticoat. This is what Mrs. Blackwell was wearing under her dress that day. She had me hide it, but I kept it. Look at it. There's not a mark on it. If there had been a struggle violent enough to tear her dress, this would show signs too. But it's pristine. Clarissa shot to her feet. You lying little. Silence, Judge Morrison commanded. He gestured for the bailiff to bring the petticoat forward. It was indeed spotless, without so much as a wrinkle out of place. Sarah continued, her voice stronger now. I saw Mrs. Blackwell tear her own dress. Your Honor, after Mr. Carson left the barn, she was angry, furious that he'd rejected her. She said no saddle tramp was going to humiliate her like that. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Thomas Blackwell was on his feet, shouting threats. Clarissa had collapsed into theatrical sobs. Judge Morrison pounded his gavel until the handle cracked. Order. I will have order. When quiet finally fell, the judge looked deeply troubled. In light of this new evidence, I have no choice but to declare a mistrial. The charges against Mr. Carson are dismissed pending further investigation. No! Thomas Blackwell's voice was murderous. That man laid hands on my wife. I don't care what some servant says. Mr. Blackwell, you will control yourself or be held in contempt. Judge Morrison warned. Sheriff Callahan, release the defendant. Emma's father moved to unlock Luke's shackles. As the iron fell away, Luke's eyes found Emma's across the courtroom. The look that passed between them said everything words couldn't. But Thomas Blackwell wasn't finished. As people began to file out, arguing and exclaiming over the dramatic turn of events, he pushed through the crowd to where Luke stood. This isn't over, he snarled, low enough that only Luke and those nearest could hear. You think you've won? I'll see you dead before I let you make a fool of me. Sheriff Callahan stepped between them. That sounds like a threat. Blackwell, in front of witnesses, no less. Blackwell's smile was cold. Just a promise, Sheriff. And speaking of promises, I'd say your position in this town has become untenable. A sheriff who can't control his own daughter, who allows her to consort with criminals. He shook his head. The town council will be hearing from me. As the Blackwells swept out, Clarissa shooting one venomous look back at Luke and Emma. Sarah approached hesitantly. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner, she said to Luke. I was scared, but when I heard you might hang. You did the right thing, Luke said gently. Thank you. Sarah nodded and hurried away, no doubt to pack her belongings before the Blackwells returned home. The courtroom slowly emptied until only Luke, Emma, and Sheriff Callahan remained. The silence was heavy with both relief and apprehension. You're free, Emma said softly, as if she couldn't quite believe it. Luke took her hands in his, uncaring of propriety. Thanks to you, Emma, You both need to be careful, Callahan interrupted, though not unkindly. Blackwell meant what he said. He's not a man to let humiliation stand. And Emma, your reputation, is already ruined, Emma finished. I knew what I was risking. Papa, I'd do it again. Luke squeezed her hands. I won't let you face the consequences alone. Whatever comes, we'll face it together, Emma said firmly. Sheriff Callahan sighed deeply, looking every one of his years. Then God help us all, because Thomas Blackwell just became our enemy, and he's got the money and influence to make our lives very difficult. As they left the courthouse, stepping into the bright afternoon sun, Luke felt the weight of freedom on his shoulders, but he also felt the shadow of Blackwell's threat. He'd won his life back, but at what cost? And what price would Emma pay for her courage? The battle was won, but Luke suspected the war was far from over. The aftermath of the trial hit Dry Creek like a thunderstorm. Within days, Sheriff Callahan received notice that his position was under review by the town council, a body that counted 2 Blackwell associates among its 5 members. Emma found herself shunned by polite society. Former friends crossing the street to avoid her. Invitations to social gatherings conspicuously absent. Luke had taken a room at the boarding house, working odd jobs around town while deciding his next move. But work was scarce. No one wanted to employ the man who'd humiliated Thomas Blackwell, even if he'd been proven innocent. It was a week after the trial when Emma heard her father arguing with someone in his office. She recognized Thomas Blackwell's voice immediately. You have 2 choices, Callahan, Blackwell was saying. Resign quietly and leave town with whatever dignity you have left, or stay and watch me destroy everything you've built here. Your choice. I've been sheriff of this town for 20 years, and you'll be remembered as the lawman who couldn't control his own daughter, who let her consort with drifters and criminals. How long before people start wondering what other laws you've bent? Emma heard her father's chair creak. Get out of my office, Blackwell. 2 weeks. Sheriff. That's all the time I'm giving you. After that, things get unpleasant. After Blackwell left, Emma found her father sitting at his desk, looking older than she'd ever seen him. "Papa, he's not bluffing." "Emma," Callahan said quietly. "He's already got Judge Morrison and half the merchants in town in his pocket. He could make good on his threats. Then we fight back," Emma said fiercely. "We can't let him." "With what?" Her father's voice was tired. "Honor, justice. Those don't buy much against Blackwell money." That evening, Emma met Luke at the old oak tree outside town, their regular meeting place since the trial. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of coming winter. "Your father's in trouble because of me," Luke said without preamble. "I should leave town, draw Blackwell's attention away." "Don't you dare," Emma interrupted. "Leaving won't solve anything. Blackwell's the type to hold grudges. He'll go after Papa regardless." Luke pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest. They'd grown bolder in their affections since the trial, knowing her reputation was already ruined. "I can't stand seeing you suffer for helping me," he murmured into her hair. "And I couldn't have stood seeing you hang for something you didn't do." She pulled back to look at him. "Luke, I need to tell you something. Yesterday, I overheard 2 men at the general store. They were discussing how Blackwell's been hiring special help from Denver. Gunmen, Luke, I think he's planning something." Luke's jaw tightened. "Then we need to be ready." But they weren't ready for how quickly Blackwell would strike. 3 nights later, Emma was returning from visiting a sick friend when she heard footsteps behind her. The streets were dark, most folks already in for the evening. She quickened her pace, but the footsteps matched hers. "Miss Callahan," a gravelly voice called. "Mr. Blackwell would like a word." Emma turned to see 2 men she didn't recognize, rough-looking types with hard eyes and guns worn low on their hips. The special help from Denver. "Mr. Blackwell can speak to me in daylight, in public," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Wasn't a request. Miss." Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth. She struggled fiercely, but they were too strong. They dragged her into an alley, and she knew with cold certainty that she was in mortal danger. The blow to her head made stars explode across her vision. As darkness claimed her, her last thought was of Luke. She woke in a small, windowless room, a root cellar, by the earthen smell. Her head throbbed, and her wrists were bound. By the light of a single lantern, she saw Clarissa Blackwell sitting in a chair, watching her with cold satisfaction. "Finally awake," Clarissa said. "Good. I wanted you conscious for this conversation. Where am I?" Emma's throat was dry, her voice hoarse. "Somewhere your father won't find you, not until it's too late. Anyway." Clarissa stood, beginning to pace. "You ruined everything, you little fool. My husband barely speaks to me now. The whole town whispers behind my back, all because you couldn't mind your own business. Luke was innocent. You lied." Clarissa's hand cracked across Emma's face. "Don't speak his name. That filthy drifter should have been grateful for my attention. Instead, he humiliated me, and you helped him do it." Emma tasted blood. "What do you want?" "Originally, I wanted you dead," Clarissa said conversationally. "But Thomas has a better idea. You're going to disappear. Maybe you ran off with your precious Luke. Maybe you couldn't face the shame. Either way, you'll be gone, and your father will be broken. He'll resign, leave town, and Thomas can install a sheriff who understands how things work. Luke will find me. Luke Carson is probably dead already," Clarissa said with vicious satisfaction. "Thomas's men were sent to deal with him tonight. A drifter found shot on the road out of town. No one will ask too many questions." Emma's heart seized. "No? Oh, yes. You see, my husband doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. You both had to pay." Clarissa moved to the door. "I'll leave you to think about that. Don't bother screaming. We're miles from anywhere, and the men outside have orders to keep you quiet by any means necessary." After she left, Emma struggled against her bonds until her wrists were raw. Luke couldn't be dead. She would know, would feel it somehow. Tears streamed down her face as she fought despair. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to tell in the windowless dark. Then she heard commotion above. Shouts, the sound of horses, gunshots. The cellar door burst open, and Luke was there, alive and wild-eyed, a gun in his hand. Behind him, she glimpsed her father and several deputized townsmen. "Emma!" Luke was beside her in an instant, cutting her bonds with his knife. "Are you hurt? Did they—" "I'm all right," she sobbed, collapsing against him. "Clarissa said you were dead." "They tried," Luke said grimly. "Jumped me outside the boarding house, but your father had been watching, expecting something like this. We fought them off, and one of them told us where you were." Sheriff Callahan appeared in the doorway. "We need to move, now. Blackwell's men might regroup." They rode hard back to town. Emma seated in front of Luke on his horse, his arms secure around her. She learned that her father had deputized several men who'd grown tired of Blackwell's stranglehold on the town men who'd been waiting for someone to stand up to him, but their relief was short-lived. As they entered Dry Creek, they saw flames lighting the night sky. The sheriff's office was ablaze, along with the boarding house where Luke had been staying. "Blackwell's making his move," Callahan said grimly. "He's trying to burn us out." They found Thomas Blackwell in the street, directing his hired gunmen as they threatened anyone who tried to fight the fires. When he saw them approaching, his face contorted with rage. "You should have stayed gone. Carson," he snarled. "Now you'll burn with the rest of them. It's over, Blackwell." Sheriff Callahan said, "Your man Daniels confessed to everything. The kidnapping, the attempted murders. You're under arrest." Blackwell laughed. "Arrest me? Look around. Sheriff, I own this town. These men answer to me, not you." "Maybe they answer to this," Luke said, producing a telegram from his pocket. "While you were busy terrorizing folks, I sent word to the U.S. Marshal in Denver. Turns out they're very interested in your land dealings. Blackwell, all those homesteaders who sold to you under questionable circumstances. Marshal's on his way with a federal warrant." Blackwell's face went pale, then purple with fury. "You're bluffing. Federal boys should be here by dawn." Callahan added, "Your choice. Blackwell, come quietly now, or explain to them why you're burning down a town." For a moment, it seemed Blackwell might order his men to open fire. The street was tense, hands hovering near weapons. Then, from the shadows, townspeople began emerging. Men and women who'd lived under Blackwell's thumb for too long, now emboldened by the sheriff's stand. They carried buckets for the fire, but also rifles, shotguns, whatever weapons they had. Blackwell saw he was outnumbered. His hired guns, faced with an armed populace and the promise of federal intervention, began backing away. "This isn't over," Blackwell spat, but he allowed himself to be taken into custody, along with Clarissa, who'd been found trying to flee with a bag of money and jewelry. As dawn broke, the fires were out, though the sheriff's office and boarding house were total losses. Luke and Emma stood together, watching the sun rise over a town that was finally free of the Blackwell shadow. "I'm sorry," Luke said quietly. "You've lost so much because of me, your reputation, your home." Emma turned in his arms. "I've gained more than I've lost. I've gained you." Sheriff Callahan approached, looking exhausted but oddly peaceful. "The federal marshal will be here soon. There'll be trials, testimony. It's not over yet. But we've won the important battle," Emma said. Her father smiled sadly. "Maybe, but Blackwell was right about one thing. My time as sheriff is probably done. Too much has happened." "Then come with us," Luke said suddenly. Both Callahans looked at him in surprise. "I've been thinking about what you said, Emma, about settling down. There's land opening up in Colorado. Good land for ranching. We could start fresh. All of us." Emma's heart leaped. "Luke Carson, is that a proposal?" He grinned, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since this all began. "I suppose it is. Emma Callahan, Will you marry me and help me build a life worth living?" "Yes," she said simply, and kissed him there in the street, in full view of the town, past caring about propriety or judgment. Sheriff Callahan cleared his throat. "Well then, guess I'd better start planning a wedding, after we deal with testifying against the Blackwells. That is." As the town began to stir, people emerging to survey the damage and begin rebuilding, Emma felt a chapter of her life closing and a new one beginning. There would be challenges ahead, trials, fresh starts, the hard work of building a life together. But with Luke's hand in hers and her father's blessing, she was ready for whatever came next. The sun climbed higher, painting Dry Creek in shades of gold and possibility. And for the first time in weeks, hope seemed stronger than fear. The mountain valley stretched before them like a green paradise, ringed by towering peaks still crowned with snow even in late spring. Luke had found this place 3 days into their flight from Dry Creek, following old trapper trails and half-remembered directions from a prospector he'd met years ago. It was perfect, hidden, defensible, with fresh water from a mountain stream and plenty of game. They'd left town quietly 2 nights after the Blackwells' arrest, knowing that even with federal marshals involved, Thomas Blackwell's reach was long and his thirst for vengeance unquenched. Sheriff Callahan had stayed behind to testify and formally resign his position, promising to follow when he could. Luke and Emma had loaded what supplies they could carry and vanished into the wilderness like smoke. Now, a week later, Emma stood beside the stream, learning to clean the rabbit Luke had snared for their supper. Her fine dresses were packed away, replaced by practical canvas and wool. Her soft hands were already showing calluses from gathering firewood and helping Luke construct their rough shelter. "You're getting better at that," Luke observed, watching her work with the knife he'd given her. "I had a good teacher," she replied, then laughed, "though I never imagined my education would include skinning rabbits." Luke moved behind her, his arms encircling her waist. Having second thoughts, she leaned back against him. "Never, though I do miss some things. Books, tea that doesn't taste of pine needles, a real bed. I'll build you a proper cabin," he promised. "With a real floor and windows. Just need time." "We have time," Emma said softly. "All the time in the world." But their peace was an illusion, and they both knew it. That night, as they sat by their small fire, Luke suddenly tensed. Emma had learned to read his moods, the way his body went still when he sensed danger. Without a word, he doused the fire with dirt and pulled her into the shadows of the trees. Minutes later, they heard horses approaching, at least 3, moving carefully through the darkness. Luke pressed his rifle into Emma's hands and drew his revolver. "If something happens," he whispered, "you run. Follow the stream up to those caves we found. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. Emma, please." The horses came into view, dark shapes against the starlit meadow. Luke was preparing to fire when a familiar voice called out, "Luke! Emma! It's William Callahan. I've got friends with me." Relief flooded through Emma as her father emerged from the shadows, accompanied by 2 men she recognized, Tom Bradley from the Blackwell Ranch, and, surprisingly, Judge Morrison's young clerk, Samuel Peters. "Papa!" Emma ran to embrace him, then looked at his companions in confusion. "Tom? Samuel? What are you doing here?" "Came to warn you," Tom said gruffly, "and maybe to join you, if you'll have us. Things have gone bad in Dry Creek. They rebuilt the fire, and over coffee," Callahan explained. The federal marshals had taken the Blackwells into custody, but during transport to Denver for trial, there had been an ambush. Clarissa was killed in the crossfire, but Thomas escaped with help from hired guns. "He's sworn vengeance," Callahan said grimly. "Put a bounty on both your heads, $5,000, dead or alive. Every bounty hunter and desperate man in 3 states will be looking for you." "Why did you come, Tom?" Luke asked the ranch hand. Tom stared into the fire. "Been working for wages my whole life, keeping my head down, ignoring what I knew was wrong. When you stood up to Blackwell, when Miss Emma risked everything for the truth. Made me think maybe it's time I stood for something too. Samuel Peters nodded. Judge Morrison was in Blackwell's pocket. We all knew it. I've been copying documents, gathering evidence of bribes and fixed trials. When Morrison heard I was asking questions, he fired me. Figured I'd better leave town before I ended up in a shallow grave. So we're all outlaws now, Emma said quietly. Not outlaws, her father corrected. Just folks looking for a place to live free. Tom knows cattle. Samuel's educated and can handle legal matters if we need them. We could build something here, away from men like Blackwell. Over the following weeks, they did just that. The men felled trees and built a proper cabin, small but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and real wooden floor. Emma and her father cleared land for a garden, hauling water from the stream to nurture the seeds they'd brought. Tom located a box canyon perfect for holding horses and the cattle they hoped to acquire through honest trade. The work was hard, harder than anything Emma had experienced, but there was a satisfaction in it she'd never found in town life. Each evening, exhausted but content, she and Luke would walk to a rise that overlooked their valley, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. It was on one such evening, a month into their new life, that Luke stopped suddenly, his hand going to his gun. Below them, a lone rider was approaching their camp. "Stay here," he told Emma, but she followed anyway, rifle in hand. The rider was a woman, Mexican by her features, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. She stopped well away from the cabin, hands visible and empty. "I mean no harm," she called in accented English. "I look for Luke Carson." Luke stepped into view, gun drawn, but not aimed. "I'm Carson. What do you want?" "My name is Maria Vasquez. I have a message and a warning." They brought her to the cabin, where she told her story. She'd worked at a hotel in Denver where Thomas Blackwell had stayed while evading federal marshals. She'd overheard his plans. "He has hired many men," she said. "Not just pistoleros, but trackers, Indians who know these mountains. He says he will burn you out like he tried in Dry Creek. But first, he wants the woman. He says she must pay special for helping you." Emma felt Luke's hand find hers under the table, squeezing tight. "Why warn us?" Callahan asked suspiciously. Maria's face hardened. "My brother worked for Blackwell once. When he tried to quit, Blackwell had him killed, made it look like accident. I want to see that man brought to justice. I think maybe you want the same." "How many men?" Luke asked. 20, maybe more. They leave Denver in 3 days." After Maria left with their thanks and some supplies, the small group held council. Tom wanted to run deeper into the mountains. Samuel suggested trying to reach a larger town where they could find protection. "No," Luke said firmly. "I'm tired of running. This is our home now. We can't fight 20 men." Tom protested. "Not in a straight fight." Luke agreed. "But we know this valley now. We have defensive positions, clean water, supplies, and we have something they don't, something worth fighting for." Emma stood beside him. "Luke's right. If we run now, we'll never stop running. Blackwell will never let us be." Her father sighed deeply. "Then we'd better prepare for war." They spent the next 2 days in frantic preparation. Luke and Tom created defensive positions among the rocks, clearing fields of fire. Emma and her father cached supplies in the caves, preparing for a siege. Samuel, surprisingly, proved talented with explosives, rigging deadfalls and crude bombs along the approach trails. On the evening of the second day, as Emma was checking their ammunition stores, Luke found her alone. "I want you to reconsider," he said. "Take the horses. Go deeper into the mountains." She silenced him with a kiss. "We've had this conversation. I'm not leaving. Emma, if something happens to you because of me, then it happens because I chose to stand with the man I love, just as you chose to stand for what was right in that courtroom." She touched his face gently. "Whatever comes tomorrow, I regret nothing. These weeks with you have been worth any price." They made love that night with desperate tenderness, aware it might be their last time. Afterward, they lay entwined, watching stars through the window Luke had cut in the cabin wall. "When this is over," Luke murmured, "I'm going to marry you proper, with a preacher and a dress and everything you deserve." "I don't need all that," Emma whispered. "I just need you." Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the sound of horses in the valley below. Luke kissed Emma once more, then took his position among the rocks. Emma checked her rifle and moved to her own post. Her father and Tom were hidden on the opposite ridge, Samuel with his explosives near the trail. They waited, watching Blackwell's men spread out below, searching for signs of their camp. Emma's heart pounded as she recognized Thomas Blackwell himself, sitting his horse like a general surveying a battlefield. Then one of the trackers found their trail, and the fight for their mountain paradise began. The first shots came from Luke's position, dropping 2 men from their saddles. Chaos erupted as Blackwell's hired guns scattered for cover, firing wildly at the rocks. Emma sighted carefully, her father's training steady in her mind, and squeezed the trigger. A man spun and fell. The battle raged through the morning, Blackwell's superior numbers offset by the defenders' superior positions. Samuel's explosives took a terrible toll, sending men and horses tumbling into ravines. But Blackwell's men were professionals, and slowly, inexorably, they advanced. By afternoon, ammunition was running low. Tom had taken a bullet in the shoulder but kept firing. Emma's father was pinned down by 3 riflemen, and Blackwell himself was pushing toward the cabin with his best gunmen. Luke appeared suddenly at Emma's side. "They're going to overrun us. We need to fall back to the caves." "No," Emma said fiercely. "This is our home. I won't." The attack came from an unexpected direction. 5 men had circled wide, coming up the stream bed. They burst over the ridge, guns blazing. Luke shoved Emma down, firing rapidly, but there were too many. A bullet caught Luke in the side, spinning him around. He went to one knee, still firing. Emma screamed, shooting desperately as men closed in. This was how it would end, she thought with strange clarity. At least they were together. Then new gunfire erupted from the tree line. Fresh riders poured into the Valley Federal Marshals, a full dozen of them, badges glinting in the sun. Maria Vasquez had not just warned them. She'd ridden hard to find help. The tide turned in minutes. Faced with federal law and caught in a crossfire, Blackwell's hired guns threw down their weapons or fled. Blackwell himself, seeing his vengeance slipping away, spurred his horse toward the cabin, pistol raised, murder in his eyes. Luke, bleeding and weakened, struggled to raise his gun, but it was Emma who stepped forward, rifle steady, and put Thomas Blackwell down with a single shot. As the smoke cleared and the marshals rounded up survivors, Emma knelt beside Luke, pressing cloth to his wound. "Don't you dare die on me, Luke Carson. Not after all this." He managed a weak smile. "Wouldn't dream of it. We've got a wedding to plan, remember?" The journey back to Dry Creek took 3 days, with Luke barely conscious for most of it, strapped to a travois behind Emma's horse. The federal marshals had done what they could for his wound, but he needed a real doctor. Emma rode beside him, holding his hand, whispering encouragement when he stirred in pain. Marshal Davidson, the leader of the federal team, rode alongside Sheriff Callahan. "Your daughter's got steel in her spine," he observed, watching Emma tenderly adjust Luke's blankets while maintaining perfect control of her mount. "She gets it from her mother," Callahan replied quietly, "though I think she surpassed us both." Dry Creek had changed in their absence. With Thomas Blackwell dead and his criminal enterprise exposed, the town seemed to breathe easier. People emerged from their shops and homes as the party rode down Main Street, some staring in shock, others beginning to cheer as they recognized their former sheriff and his daughter. Doc Harwood, the town physician, took charge of Luke immediately. As he worked to extract the bullet and clean the wound, Emma refused to leave, holding Luke's hand through the surgery. Only when Harwood pronounced him stable did she allow herself to collapse in exhaustion. She woke in her old room in what had been their home above the sheriff's office. The building had been rebuilt by grateful townspeople in their absence. Her father sat beside her bed, looking older but somehow more at peace. "Luke?" she asked immediately. "Sleeping. Doc says he'll recover fully, given time." Callahan smiled. "You saved him. Emma, your quick action stopping the bleeding probably made the difference." "We all saved each other," Emma corrected. She sat up, noting her old dresses hanging in the wardrobe, the familiar quilt on the bed. "It feels strange being back." "It won't be for long, I suspect," her father said. "But there are matters to settle first." Over the following days, as Luke recovered, the full scope of Thomas Blackwell's crimes came to light. Samuel Peters, working with federal investigators, had uncovered years of land fraud, intimidation, and murder. The evidence Emma had gathered proved crucial in documenting the pattern of abuse. The town council, freed from Blackwell's influence, offered Sheriff Callahan his position back with apologies. He declined politely. "I've been a lawman long enough," he said. "Time for younger folks to take the reins." Instead, they offered the position to Tom Bradley, who accepted with surprised humility. "Never thought I'd wear a badge," he admitted to Luke and Emma, "but maybe that's what this town needs. Someone who knows what it's like on both sides of the law." A week into their return, Emma was sitting with Luke in Doc Harwood's recovery room when an unexpected visitor arrived. Maria Vasquez entered hesitantly, dressed in traveling clothes. "I wanted to see that you recovered," she said to Luke, "and to thank you, all of you." "We should be thanking you," Emma said warmly. "If you hadn't warned us and brought the marshals," Maria smiled sadly. "It was the least I could do. My brother, he would have liked to know men like you still existed, men who stand against evil even when it costs them." She left that afternoon, heading east to family in Missouri, carrying letters of recommendation from Marshal Davidson and Sheriff Callahan. "A new start," she said, "like you gave me the courage to seek." As Luke grew stronger, he and Emma took walks through the town, noting the changes. Without Blackwell's oppressive influence, Dry Creek was transforming. New businesses opened, homesteaders returned to claims they'd been forced to abandon, and there was talk of building a school. But not everyone was happy with the changes. One evening, as Emma helped serve dinner at the boarding house where they were staying, Clarissa Blackwell's cousin, Margaret Thornton, confronted her. "You killed them," Margaret hissed. "My cousin, her husband, murdered them for their money." Emma set down her tray carefully. "Clarissa died in an ambush her husband arranged. Thomas Blackwell died attacking federal officers and trying to murder us. The only murders were the ones they committed." "Liar!" Margaret raised her hand to strike, but Luke caught her wrist. He'd entered silently, still moving carefully but regaining his strength. "The lady told you the truth," he said quietly. "Your cousin and her husband destroyed lives for greed. They got justice, nothing more." Margaret yanked free and stormed out, but not before spitting. "This isn't over." That night, Emma found her father in his temporary office, going through old case files. "I'm closing out the records," he explained, "making sure everything's documented properly for Tom." "Papa," Emma said, sitting across from him. "Luke's almost healed. We'll be leaving soon, heading back to the valley. Will you come with us?" Callahan leaned back, studying his daughter. "I've been thinking about that. This town. It's been my life for 20 years. Your mother's buried here, but my daughter won't be here. My future grandchildren won't be here." He smiled. "And I've discovered I quite like the idea of raising cattle instead of chasing outlaws." Emma hugged him fiercely. "The cabin's small, but we can build—" "I can swing a hammer as well as any man," Callahan interrupted. "Better than some, I'd wager." 2 days later, the town gathered for an impromptu celebration that served multiple purposes: a farewell for the Callahans, a welcome for the new sheriff, and a long-overdue recognition of Emma's courage in exposing the truth. Judge Morrison had been replaced by a circuit judge from Denver, an honest man named Patrick O'Brien, who insisted on a formal ceremony. "Miss Callahan," he said, standing before the crowd. Your pursuit of justice, despite personal risk and social censure, represents the finest traditions of American citizenship. This town owes you a debt that cannot be repaid. Emma, uncomfortable with the attention, simply said, "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Judge O'Brien corrected gently. "Very few would have. That's what makes it remarkable." Luke stood beside her, his arm around her waist, a public display of affection that would have scandalized the town months ago, but now seemed only natural. His wounds still pained him, but he stood straight and proud as the judge continued. "Mr. Carson, you too showed courage in maintaining your innocence and dignity in the face of false accusations. This town failed you, but you bore it with grace." "I had help," Luke said, looking at Emma with such open love that several ladies in the crowd dabbed at their eyes. The celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than Emma had seen since before their troubles began. But as the sun set, she found herself on the porch of the boarding house, looking toward the mountains. Luke joined her, moving carefully but determinedly. "Ready to go home?" "More than ready," she admitted. "I love these people, but you found where you belong," he finished. "I understand. I felt the same when I first saw that valley, like I'd been looking for it my whole life without knowing." Samuel Peters approached them, looking nervous. "Luke, Miss Emma, Emma, I wanted to ask, that is—" "Spit it out, Samuel," Luke said with amusement. "Might there be room in your valley for another settler? I've saved some money, and I'm tired of shuffling papers. Thought maybe I could learn cattle, help with the legal aspects of building a real community." Emma and Luke exchanged glances. "We'd be honored to have you," Emma said. "Fair warning, though, it's hard living. After facing down Blackwell's guns, I think I can handle it." Samuel grinned. That night, in the quiet of Luke's recovery room, Emma and Luke made plans. They would leave in 3 days, taking her father, Samuel, and surprisingly, 2 families of homesteaders who'd heard about their valley and asked to join them. The mountains that had been their refuge would become the foundation of a new community. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Luke asked her. "You could stay here, rebuild your life in comfort." Emma silenced him with a kiss. "My life is with you, in town or mountains or wherever else we might wander. Though I do hope the wandering is done for a while." "It is," Luke promised. "I've found what I was looking for all those years on the trail. A home, a purpose. You." The next morning brought unexpected news. Margaret Thornton had left town in the night, but not before setting fire to what remained of the Blackwell Ranch. The house was destroyed, but in the ruins, investigators found more evidence of Thomas Blackwell's crimes, including a hidden safe containing documents that implicated several other prominent citizens in his schemes. "Like a poison being drawn from a wound," Sheriff Tom Bradley said. "Painful, but necessary for healing." Emma stood with Luke and her father, watching the smoke rise from the distant ranch. An ending, she thought, but also a beginning. The old order that had oppressed so many was literally in ashes. What grew from those ashes would be up to them. "Ready?" Luke asked, taking her hand. "Ready," Emma affirmed, turning her back on the smoke and looking toward the mountains. "Let's go build something better." As they prepared for departure, the town they'd saved prepared to save itself. And Emma Callahan, once the proper sheriff's daughter, looked forward to a life of hard work, simple pleasures, and love deeper than any she'd imagined possible. She'd risked everything for justice and found herself in the process. Now it was time to live the life that courage had earned. 5 years had passed since the showdown with Thomas Blackwell, and the valley had transformed from a hideout into a thriving community. What had begun with one rough cabin now boasted a dozen homesteads, a small schoolhouse, and even a general store run by Samuel Peters, who'd proven as adept at commerce as he'd once been at legal documents. William Callahan sat on the porch of his daughter's home, whittling a toy horse for his grandson. At 60, he'd found a peace in these mountains that had eluded him during all his years wearing a badge. His hair had gone completely white, but his eyes were sharp as ever as he watched young William Luke Carson toddle across the yard, chasing chickens with delighted shrieks. "Papa, could you watch him for a spell?" Emma emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. At 28, motherhood and mountain life had only enhanced her beauty, adding strength to grace. "I need to help Luke with the new corral." "Go on," Callahan said, scooping up his namesake. "This little maverick and I have some serious chicken herding to discuss." Emma found Luke working with 3 other men to set posts for an expanded horse pen. Their ranch had become known throughout the region for quality horses, with Luke's gentle training methods producing mounts sought after from Denver to Santa Fe. Letter came with a supply wagon. Luke called out, pulling an envelope from his pocket. From Tom Bradley. Emma opened it eagerly. Tom wrote regularly, keeping them informed of life in Dry Creek. This letter contained particularly interesting news. The town was petitioning for a railroad spur. Growth was continuing. And most surprisingly, Margaret Thornton had returned after 5 years' absence, apparently reformed and seeking to make amends for her past behavior. "Think she's sincere?" Luke asked, reading over her shoulder. "People can change," Emma said thoughtfully. "We're proof of that. Look at what we've built from suspicion and false accusations." Their valley settlement, now officially named Hope Valley on territorial maps, had indeed become proof of what forgiveness and hard work could achieve. The families who joined them had prospered. Children ran freely between the homesteads, and plans were underway for a proper church come spring. That evening, the community gathered for their weekly shared meal, a tradition Emma had insisted on to maintain their bonds. Tables were set up outside the schoolhouse, laden with dishes from each family. Children played games as adults discussed plans for winter preparations and spring planting. Samuel Peters, now sporting a beard and the confident bearing of a successful merchant, raised a toast to 5 years of freedom and friendship, and to Luke and Emma Carson, without whom none of this would exist. "To community," Luke countered, raising his own cup. "We all built this together." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Emma found herself standing where she and Luke had often paused during their courtship, the rise overlooking their entire valley. But now she wasn't alone. Luke stood beside her, their son on his hip, her father nearby with several other settlers, all looking out at what they'd created. "Any regrets?" Luke asked quietly. Emma thought of the life she might have led, comfortable respectability in town, tea parties and social calls, a proper husband who came home at predictable hours. Then she looked at her calloused hands, her son's bright eyes, her husband's weathered face, the community of souls who'd become family. "Not a one," she said firmly, "though I do sometimes wonder what became of everyone we left behind." As if in answer to her musings, a rider appeared on the valley trail, a lone figure moving at an easy pace, clearly expected rather than threatening. As he drew closer, Emma gasped in recognition. Doc Harwood, the elderly physician, dismounted with a groan, grinning at their shocked faces. "Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about. Tom Bradley hasn't stopped talking about Hope Valley and the miracles you've worked here?" Over dinner, Harwood explained he'd retired, turning his practice over to a younger man. "Thought I'd spend my remaining years somewhere peaceful. Tom said you might have room for an old sawbones who can also teach school when he's not setting bones." "We'd be honored," Luke said immediately. The community had been without a doctor, relying on Emma's growing knowledge of herbs and basic medicine. Having a real physician would be a tremendous asset. As the evening progressed, Harwood shared news from the wider world. The railroad was bringing change everywhere. Indian tribes were being forced onto reservations, and the wild frontier was slowly being tamed. "Progress, they call it," Harwood said with a shrug. "But looking around here, I'd say you've found a better way. Growth without losing what matters." Later, as families dispersed to their homes and stars emerged in the clear mountain sky, Emma and Luke walked slowly back to their cabin. William had fallen asleep in his grandfather's arms, thumb firmly in mouth. "We've come so far," Emma murmured. Sometimes I can barely remember that frightened girl who visited a condemned man in jail. I remember her, Luke said softly. Brave enough to seek truth when everyone else had already decided. Beautiful enough to make a man believe in tomorrow, even when he was facing the gallows. They paused at their door, looking back at the peaceful valley lamplight glowing warmly in windows. The distant sound of Samuel's fiddle as he practiced for Sunday's service. The eternal whisper of wind in the pines. "What do you see for our future?" Emma asked. Luke was quiet for a moment, considering. "I see William growing strong and free, maybe brothers and sisters for him. I see this community becoming a real town, but keeping its heart. I see us growing old together, sitting on this very porch, watching grandchildren play where we once fought for our lives." "And I see the same," Emma said, reaching up to kiss him. "Everything we dreamed of in that cold jail cell, we've built with our own hands." Inside, they put William to bed in the small room Luke had added to the cabin last year. Sheriff Callahan was already snoring in his own room, and the house settled into peaceful quiet. But Emma felt too restful for sleep. She lit a lamp and pulled out paper and ink, beginning a letter to Tom Bradley. She wrote of their progress, of Doc Harwood's arrival, of her father's continued health and happiness. Then she paused, thinking of how to express the deeper truth. "We faced darkness and chose light." She finally wrote, "We faced lies and chose truth. We faced hatred and chose love. The cost was high, nearly everything we had, but what we gained was worth any price. A life of purpose, a love tested by fire, and the knowledge that ordinary people can stand against evil and win." Luke appeared behind her, reading over her shoulder. "You should write our story someday, so others know what's possible when people choose courage over comfort." Emma smiled up at him. "Perhaps I will, though who would believe it? A proper sheriff's daughter falling for a falsely accused drifter, fighting corrupt power, fleeing to the mountains, building a new world from nothing but hope and determination. Those who need to believe it will," Luke said with certainty. "Those who are facing their own darkness and need to know there's light on the other side." As they prepared for bed, Emma took one last look out the window at their valley bathed in moonlight. 5 years ago, she'd made a choice that changed everything: to believe an innocent man, to fight for justice, to risk all for love. That choice had led to exile, danger, and hardship beyond anything she'd imagined. It had also led to this: a life richer than any she'd dreamed, a love deeper than any story, a home built on truth and courage. In the end, the sheriff's daughter who'd saved a condemned cowboy had discovered that in saving him, she'd saved herself as well. And in their mountain valley, far from the corruption and lies of their past, they'd built something that would endure, a testament to the power of ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice, who choose love over fear, who dare to build the world they wish to see. The lamp flickered out, and Emma Carson curled into her husband's arms, listening to the night sounds of their hard-won paradise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new joys. But tonight, she was simply grateful for the journey that had brought them here, for the man beside her, for the community they'd built, and for the bright future stretching ahead like an endless, hopeful trail. In Hope Valley, dreams had become reality. And for a sheriff's daughter and a wandering cowboy, that was miracle enough. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Let us know in the comments so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts on Emma and Luke's journey. Until next time, partners.